and is an absolutely magnificent and stunning piece. You can see it from Highway 40 as you're driving into Terre Haute, and it's absolutely arresting. And then when you get close up, it's even more so. So I was interested in the public sculpture, and when I joined the board, Bev Christie was chair, and an outstanding chair, I might add. And she had the gift of getting all of us who were on the board involved. And that's really the secret of a good board. If you feel like you're a part of everything, you're participating, you're doing some good. It really does make you want to do more. So that's how I got involved. But why don't we ask Bev how she got involved? Because not only was she chair, but I think she was a founding member of Art Spaces. Weren't you, Bev?
Yes, I was. Now, can you hear me? I guess you can.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember how all this started, but long before it was really Art Spaces, it was just a group through Jim Eifert from Rose-Hulman, who had the idea that to help with economic development, Terre Haute needed to do something with their city, and we thought perhaps a visual art project would be one thing we could do. And so over time, he wrote a grant, and we worked through the Wabash Valley Community Foundation, who gave us enough money to hire, and I'm not saying much money, it was very little money actually, to get an executive director. So we just talked about what we could do and where we could do it and how we could do it. And Mary Kramer then became the executive director, and I think this was like 2005, 2004, something like that. So it's just, and she was an artist, and I remember being on the board and found out that she had been had been selected from one of the candidates. And I was a little disappointed at the time because I didn't really know Mary, but I thought if we're going to be working on economic development, we need someone that has a background in finance or money. Hold on. We don't need an artist. We have artists all over the city through SWOPE and a lot of interest, but we needed actually someone who knew how to raise money. Well, was I wrong? This woman doesn't sleep. Creative energy is just unbelievable. And I think Sherry can tell you a little bit more from where we were to where we are now, how that all developed. But it has been an incredible ride. And actually, Mary knew nothing about sculptures and just got on the internet. She called everybody that she could think of or that appeared on the internet, and slowly began to figure out how we could at least get started. And I remember we talked about grants, and she and I often together would go to various companies and people and talk about what we were planning to do. And it was surprising. We thought there would be a lot of negativity about it. I think there were some like, oh, they did not believe that we could do this in Terre Haute.
Exactly. Yeah, there was a lot of cynicism about it.
Yeah, that's true. So why don't I let Sherry continue this and tell us a little bit more about once we got the board going and we began to put up some sculptures, people began to look at the art and begin to think that this is something kind of interesting. So there you go, Sherry.
Absolutely. Bev has already mentioned Jim Eifert, who was the initial impetus behind everything. And he put together an outstanding board. I believe the first chair of the board was Kevin Runyon from Indiana State. And I think the second one was Dee Dee Schindel. And so all of these people, you know, when things are first getting started, how important it is that the energy, the enthusiasm, the thoughtfulness, and so forth of certain people just keep things going. And so Kevin at Indiana State was certainly instrumental and was one of the primary people responsible for the fact that Indiana State now has quite a vast sculpture collection. Very, very impressive sculpture collection. And of course, Mary Kramer. And Mary, if you're watching, boy, do we miss you. Not only the fact that we're taking over, but also the fact that you're not feeling well. And we hope you feel well again very, very soon. But that said, why don't we go to the website so we can see some of the photographs, Kate?
Absolutely. I feel like I heard Bev say it's been an incredible ride, and I absolutely, am astounded. I feel the same way when I look at all these sculptures that you all have been able to put in place since 2004. It's just astounding. It's really fabulous, and
it really is. There are now, Kate, 20 sculptures. No one would have thought that was possible. Absolutely no one. So you now have I think I now have the screen back up again. So can you focus in on Flame of the Millennium?
yes.
That's the first sculpture that I mentioned. And you can see what a wonderful sculpture it is. And it's also been landscaped beautifully by the people at Rose-Hulman. Let's look at the second one, Composite House for Terre Haute. And there we go, Composite House for Terre Haute. And that's another fascinating one to me. If you go by Gilbert Park on Wabash Avenue, you will see this sculpture. It looks almost like a doll's house that is made out of Indiana limestone. The creation of this by Laura Ewing was negotiated, of course, by Eileen, hi Eileen.
Hi there.
Not by Eileen Prose, you didn't. It was
No.
negotiated by Mary Kramer. But our friend Harriet McNeil took the artist around and showed her all of these houses, which have been considered for quite some time a kind of a Terre Haute archetype house. And in this one particular neighborhood that surrounds Gilbert Park, there are a bunch of them. Well, when Harriet was telling me about this project she was working on and told me that there was this particular architectural style all around Terre Haute, I told her I had no idea what she was talking about. She said, oh, come on, they're everywhere. And I said, well, I don't know. And after I finally saw one, I realized I had lived in one of Terre Haute's houses. And that's one of the beautiful things about what public sculpture does. It makes you aware of your culture in ways that you simply were not before. And so this was, for me, the first example of that. Why don't you show us now the tree sculpture? I think that might be the next one on the website. Yeah. Now the tree sculpture is interesting because a lot of people look at this and say, what? I don't see tree. But if you look from left to right, you've got a T, and then you have next to that, in that very graceful shape, an R, and then it's hard to see from this angle, but then you have two E's. And this sculpture is just outside the ISU football stadium. And it's wonderful in many respects, one of which is that it draws from a book that was written by a professor at Indiana State, Dr. Marion Jackson. The book is called 101 Trees of Indiana. And this sculpture honors that book, but so does the park that surrounds it, because there is a walking path in the shape of the state of Indiana, and planted along this path are the 101 trees. I don't know if it's all 101 or not, but I know that it's a whole bunch of them. And so you have an interesting example of the culture, not only of our community, but also of our state, built into this one very interesting, and I should add, very controversial piece. A lot of people say, I don't know how you get tree out of that. But that's one of the beauties of public sculpture. Not every piece is going to appeal to everybody. It simply is the case that some of us, even those of us who've been on the board for a long time, don't particularly care for this sculpture or that sculpture. And as I said, this is one of the more controversial, but I think that also makes it one of the more interesting, because you can talk about it virtually endlessly in a lot of ways. There's also signage around this explaining the sculpture. And that's another interesting thing about public sculpture. You have not only the sculpture, but at least here in Terre Haute, you also have some explanation about the sculpture. And with that in mind, I would like to go now, Kate, fairly far back to the website, and let's go all the way down. We're going to keep going down. We're going to come back to one right there. Max Ehrmann at the Crossroads, right in the middle, you see? Okay. I call this sculpture Our Max. And the reason is that Max Ehrmann, or Ehrmann if you prefer, his poem Desiderata was popular, first of all, when he initially wrote it in the 1920s, but never really lost favor, although it became extremely popular then in the 1970s and 80s. And so popular, in fact, that on my floor in the Parsons Hall on the ISU campus, there was a professor who had a copy of Desiderata on his office door. Also, our friend Arthur Feinsod had a copy of this on his dorm wall when he was an undergraduate student at Harvard. Desiderata became so popular and was so universally acknowledged as a wonderful example of how to live your life. And Desiderata, by the way, means basically things that are desired. And so it's a list of the things that Max wanted in his life. He carried the list around in his pocket, so the story goes, and would occasionally add to it. And Our Max is probably the most popular sculpture on the collection, in the collection, because it's life-size. And it's become a popular place to have your photograph taken. I saw photographs of two students all dressed up for the prom, who were right there with Max, having their all dressed up photo taken. A very dear friend of mine, her grandson did mask making at the Swope Art Museum in conjunction with their summer youth art program. And he went down to the corner then, put on his mask, sat on the bench, and had his photograph taken with Our Max. I love that story too. There are hundreds of stories like that. And I don't know how many people in Terre Haute, but I'm guessing very, very few knew that Desiderata was written by Max Ehrmann. The sculpture, although I call it Our Max, the sculpture is called Max Ehrmann at the Crossroads. It's at the corner of 7th and Wabash because Max used to sit there and watch the world go by and write poems and talk to people. One of the poems that he wrote begins with the line, what place is lovelier than Terre Haute? And it ends with the line, here is the world in miniature. I think about that all of the time. Those of us who moved here, rather than people like Nancy, who were born and raised here, those of us who moved here really feel that this is the world in miniature. And those of us who've been fortunate to travel, I think, feel that even more so. Very definitely. It's good to come home to our corner of the world in miniature. So this is one of the most popular sculptures. I hope everybody will feel free to chime in. Yes.
I have a quick question. Do we know, Sherry, if Max Ehrmann was born and raised here or a transplant?
Yes. Max was born and raised here. His family owned a company that made jeans. Help me on this, those of you who know more than I do. And their office, or rather their company, their plant, was where the Indiana Historical Society is now. So that's a most appropriate mingling of the past and the present. Max was born here, one of several children, the youngest, and his family, everybody in his family, decided that he needed to go to college. And so they all worked together, sent him to DePauw. After he graduated from DePauw, he took a train and went off to Massachusetts and enrolled as a graduate student at Harvard. After all of that, he then decided that where he really wanted to live was in Terre Haute, and he came back home. He worked in the family business for a while, but actually I think he was a bookkeeper, but he decided that that was not really for him. Well, I think maybe his family also decided that he needed to devote his time to writing poetry. And so he did. His most famous poem is Desiderata, but he has many poems, including the one I quoted, that are quite wonderful. One of my favorites is called Ehu, which is a Greek word, I think, that means something like alas. And in this poem, he describes his life, and he says that he wasn't really born to do much, except write a few poems and so forth. And then he says that in the shadows of a creek, I wrote my name. That's not an exact quote, and I'm ashamed of that. But his whole notion was that he hadn't made much of a mark. So his name was basically written in water. And I love that poem because it's so ironic, and it teaches us that we don't ever know what the legacy is that we've left. So Max wrote that poem, and then 75 years later, there is a sculpture at the corner of 7th and Wabash to honor him. I just love that story. We never know.
Tina actually said that her mother-in-law has a copy of that poem on the wall right inside of her front door, the most popular poem.
Wonderful, yes.
And it totally fits with Terre Haute being a bellwether.
Yes, it does. It certainly does. At one point, some people came all the way from Australia to Terre Haute to visit Max's birthplace. And they were most disappointed to discover that there was nothing here that honored him. That's not quite true. There's a very small plaque outside the Vigo County Public Library, but I didn't even know it was there until somebody pointed it out to me. And so there were many reasons for the creation of this sculpture. But I say with some pride that this was the first sculpture on Terre Haute's cultural trail. I mentioned with regard to Composite House, how important public sculpture is to make us aware of our heritage. And this is probably the best example of all. One of the reasons it's the best example, and everybody needs to go to the corner of 7th and Wabash and see this sculpture, is because there are embedded in the bricks that you can see, there are embedded quotes from Desiderata, and then just to the right of the bench is the entire poem. So the sculpture honors the man, and it also honors his work. And you see the tablet on his lap. Etched on there is, well, here is the world in miniature. Incidentally, the sculpture is by Terre Haute's native sculptor, Bill Wolfe. There are a lot of wonderful stories surrounding his creation of this. And one of my favorites is that when we were trying to raise funds for the sculpture, Bill had completed a clay mock-up of just the head, and he walked around with the head on a stick, which was a very interesting image to see. So anybody else want to chime in here with our Max, or are there any questions?
Oh,
If,
I had just a little aside here. The first winter that this sculpture was up, Mary was there one day and noticed that somebody had put, it was snowing and icy, had put a pink scarf around Max's neck.
yes.
And
Yes.
just to keep him warm. And then someone came by and put a hat on him. And I remember Mary coming to the office saying, you know, we can't have this on the sculpture. They're just going to ruin this thing.
Yeah.
The next thing you know, there are all sorts of people out there taking pictures.
Mm-hmm.
And then we began to realize that people were identifying not only with the weather, but with Max, and we're looking at the poem that was embedded in, I guess it's on the bronze part of it. But we just had to laugh because people were so involved in Max and the snow and keeping him warm.
Yes, and I have a friend who's kind of a cool guy, and when he had his picture taken with Max, Max was wearing sunglasses.
Oh yeah.
We personalize public art in very special ways. Incidentally, most recently, if you look right to the right of Max on the bench, there was a sign that said, "Celebrate Juneteenth." So Max is very much up to date with things that are going on in our world today. Fortunately, he doesn't need to worry about getting the coronavirus. So that's the good news. The next sculpture I'd like for you to go to.
Before we leave Max,
yes.
I would just like to add that he was married to Bertha King, wasn't
Yes.
it?
Yes.
Who had one of the first classical schools in Terre Haute, which I
She
think,
did, Eileen, and wasn't it a school for women?
well, primarily for women, but they also had children, young boys.
Oh, they did.
In
So
the,
it was
lower,
co-ed.
in the elementary grades.
Okay.
Yes, yeah.
One of the sad stories from my point of view is that Bertha decided that Max's journals needed to be edited, and so she edited them the way that she thought they should be, and then she burned the originals.
Oh,
So we don't have the originals. Sorry, Bertha, I don't mean to cast aspersions on your character. And I'm sure that he had written things that she felt were inappropriate. She didn't want Max remembered for whatever, because at the time, that would not, she felt, have been fair to him. Of course, now we would have perhaps entirely different views of Max, but who knows. But she also did an incredible service because she put together a compilation of his poems, which is still available. So although I wish she hadn't burned the journals, I'm awfully glad she saved the poems.
yes.
And what she did save of the journals. Are we ready to move on to, let's move on, Kate, to A Chorus of Trumpets.
Before we do, Andy Thies commented in and said the other day he saw a photo of Max wearing a mask on to protect him and others from the virus.
Oh, that's funny.
Very good. Very good. That, yes. Yes, Max is one of ours. In fact, Bev mentioned that Mary was a bit concerned about what was happening to Max. And she went online to check what other executive directors of public collections said about this sort of behavior with regard to the sculptures. And she also checked with Bill. And all of them, especially Bill, said that it was inevitable that as people love the sculpture, they are going to embrace it in their own individual and personal ways. Let's go to A Chorus of Trumpets, which is up, up. No, it's down. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Yeah.
Chorus of Trumpets. I wanted to call your attention to this one because it's also one of the most popular sculptures in the collection. And I wanted to call attention to it because it's on the ISU campus. I mentioned earlier how wonderful the sculpture collection is at ISU. Don't know how many pieces there are now, but several, each wonderfully located. But one of the things that makes this one so special, it's called, I repeat, A Chorus of Trumpets. It's outside of Tyree. Okay, I want you to imagine you're going to Tilson Music Hall and you walk up the steps to go through the front door into Tilson Music Hall. And if you turn around, you see this sculpture. And it is so beautifully lit at night that at various performances at Tilson, you will see people standing out on that balcony and staring at the sculpture. It's a remarkable piece. And I understand it's also one of the favorite pieces of Dan and Cherie Bradley. So I mentioned that Kevin Runyon was responsible in so many ways for there being sculptures on the ISU campus. And I mustn't forget that the president of the university, when most of this was taking place, was Dan Bradley. And this sculpture is not far at all from Condit House. And so for, I'm sure, many reasons, became a favorite of Dan and Cherie's. It's an absolutely gorgeous sculpture. And one of the interesting things about this sculpture is that if you go down 7th Street, and there you are on 7th Street at the stop sign, right outside of that kind of round, funny building. That's a part of the administrative pavilion, President Landini called it.
The
If
link.
you go there and you look off, if you look off to the west, you will see framed in the outline of that funny round building, A Chorus of Trumpets. And it's almost like a gateway to the sculpture, because you can walk through that arch and you can walk all the way then right up to the sculpture. It's remarkable.
That is neat. Beautiful. Very beautiful. I love the way it's photographed here too.
And that brings me to the next sculpture that I think we should concentrate on. Are we almost out of time?
We are at 9:40.
Okay, so we are almost out of time. I want you to go up and you're almost there. Emanating Connections.
Yes.
There we are. Emanating Connections is an interesting sculpture for many reasons. First of all, it's made out of recycled tires. So if we're wondering what we can do to recycle materials that otherwise will be messing up our landscape and filling up our landfills, this is one of the possibilities. It's an intriguing sculpture on its own, but I also asked Kate to go on the artist's website. The artist is named Jakaya Booker. Okay, there she is.
There she is.
And if you look at that photograph of Jakaya, look at that phenomenal costume. It's interesting, by the way, since Chakaya believes that she should, as a sculptor, she should use her body as sculpture and she should costume herself. So it's interesting that that sculpture is right outside Indiana State University's new theater. When Chakaya was here, she's quite an extraordinary character. And when she was here, I don't remember, Bev, you may remember who was taking her around Terre Haute. But as I recall, they had a fairly small car. And I remember watching her with this voluminous costume get into the car and wondering if she would make it. And I immediately flashed on when I was in high school and went to the prom. And this was the old days when we wore hoop skirts. And my date looked at my dress, looked at the car, and I think he wondered how I was going to get in the car. But I did manage to get in the car, and Chakaya managed to get in the car, and it's one of the, another one of the more controversial sculptures that is available. It's called Emanating Connections, and I think you can see, if you go back, yes, I think you can see how that works. Incidentally, at the time that we were dedicating our sculpture by Chakaya, so no, Indianapolis was not dedicating a sculpture, I don't think, but they had a special exhibition of several of her sculptures all around the town. Am I right? Is her name pronounced Chakaya?
Chakaya.
Chakaya, okay, very
Chakaya.
good.
Uh-huh.
And incidentally, when the sculpture was dedicated, our own Bev Christie was one of the speakers at the dedication. And I think, are we almost out of time, Kate? Because I think I only have one more story, and right?
Want to share it?
Almost out of time?
We are getting close.
Okay, then I want you to go to the Gateway sculpture.
Okay, good.
No, that's not what it's called. I always have the wrong name for that sculpture. Gatekeeper, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think of it as Gateway because it's at the corner of 7th and Poplar, which is the beginning of the Arts Corridor. So I always think of it as the Gateway, but it's called Gatekeeper. And this is my final story. When the artist came to Terre Haute, and as you've already realized, for virtually all of the sculptures, we have a very nice dedication ceremony. But when the artist came to Terre Haute, she, Sally Rogers, in her speech said that she loved Terre Haute because she had never felt so welcome any place that she had placed one of her sculptures. Not only welcome, but she also was stunned by the number of people who showed up for the dedication. You know, there are so many things that make us feel good about the community we live in. But certainly our public art is one of the things. Another one of the things is the attention that has come to our world in miniature as a result of bringing all of these people to town. So that said, I think it's time, isn't it, Kate, to show the next sculpture that is on the horizon for Art Spaces.
I do. Oh, I'm excited to show the video. I'm also sitting here thinking and loving hearing your stories, and you know, and Eileen and Bev and everybody who has something to share about the different sculptures in town. And it gives me an idea that I'm going to recommend to Mary Kramer the next time I talk to her, because when we were talking and planning for this presentation, she shared that one of her projects or goals was to create an audio tour of the different sculptures, so someone could, you know, put in their headphones on, you know, listen to it on their phone as they're walking through on their own and self-guide, but they can hear the audio and explanation. I think you ladies need to get together in the recording studio and talk. Just sit and talk about each piece and share. And that could be your guided tour right there. I love it. Absolutely love it. Because that's what makes it really special and heartwarming. And so we need to figure that out. Somebody who knows how to do that needs to figure that out, keep it all together.
That's a great idea. And let me just add, we've only basically shown you just a very, very few of the sculptures. So there are a whole lot more on the website. And there's also a map on the website. So people can go around town and visit the sculpture and answer questions about each sculpture and so forth. It's a great project, especially now when we're cloistered, as I call it, when we feel like we shouldn't be going out in public very much. Drive by the sculptures and share them with your children.
Before I click, and before I attempt to show this video too, I should draw attention to, I loved this quote that Andy shared on the Facebook page for Art Spaces, and he mentions that public sculpture can create destinations. And what we have found in today's world is that we need more quality destinations for people to experience. And he's absolutely right. We need more of that right now. And how much, I hope people are getting out and enjoying it and seeing the value there. So
really quick, I got a couple of questions.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
So one question is, how would someone get involved with Terre Haute Spaces?
Wow, we are always looking for people to get involved. There is, of course, the board. There are a number of subcommittees. I think you certainly could contact me, or you could contact Mary Kramer. On the website, there's a place to contact, and so you can do that. There's also, stop by the office. Well, no, they're not in the office now. They're working from home. Boy, life is tough right now. But by all means, if you're interested, contact us. And, things are complex right now in terms of communication. So if you don't hear right away, please don't give up. Art Spaces needs you.
Well, and then Andy commented that he loves hearing the stories and memories of the sculptures. He thinks it's a fantastic idea on doing the recordings. Cherie said she is a remarkable person in response to Chikaya.
Yeah.
And she also said that this was a great presentation. We will all be glad when we can visit them again in person. And then she also said to please contact her if you're wanting to get involved at Cherie, CHERI.Bradley@indstate.edu. And apparently it was Marie that said she loved to hear about the sculptures, not Andy. They're both using the same one.
Oh, well, welcome to both of you.
Yes.
I'm going to play then this video of the Neighbors project that is going on and moving forward, even though, and Mary reassured me that even though, a lot of things are shut down and the offices are shut down during this COVID time, that that production part and that behind the scenes part of these projects is still going on. So, so let's see.
We don't have the audio. At least I don't have it on my computer.
Can you hear it, Rebecca? No? Shoot.
Well, let me just say a few things about this then. What the audio would be telling you is that the first images you saw were of the Rives neighborhood, which is where this sculpture will be located. And one of the things that took place as the sculpture was being planned were a lot of discussions among residents of that neighborhood. And so there was a lot of input from them with regard to what kind of sculpture they would like to see. As you can see, they got quite involved in it, and there were a lot of people. Mary was so pleased with how this went. She said she wished that they did it for all of the sculptures. Now, this is a mock-up of what the sculpture will look like. They call it a maquette. Have we got the audio?
I think.
Tina Newsham also
Structures
said
hold a
that-
surprise, though. They can transform into a variety of orientations, allowing for creative programming to address community-identified needs. For example, this city streetscape opens 8 storefronts that can be programmed for health education events, activities aimed at teaching job skills or recruitment, opportunities to build relationships with law enforcement in a non-emergency situation, and many other options. Other orientations will allow for different activities, including theatrical productions, music, movies, or a big town square. Many partners have committed to bringing Neighbors to fruition, including the Mayor's Office, Parks and Recreation, who will own the completed project, Indiana State University, Rose-Hulman Institute of Technology, Art Spaces, and Vectren, among others. By intentionally integrating art and creativity into programming desired by residents, Neighbors can serve as a catalyst for change so badly needed in this resource-challenged, nearly downtown neighborhood.
Great. I love it.
I'm sorry I didn't get to hear all of the narration, which was done by Tina Kruger. I just would like to call your attention to the screen that is up right now. The artist who is creating this is Matthew Mazzotta. Some of you might be interested in going online and typing in his name so you can see other sculptures that he's done, which have moved public sculpture in directions that are so creative and imaginative. The potential here is so exciting. And recently, a committee has been set up to figure out what programming will take place. So that once the sculpture is up, it will continue to be important and used and a vital part of the community, a central component of the community. I think also that this video is available on the website, so you can hear it all with Tina's narration.
And Tina Kruger Newsham is actually on here with us.
Oh, hello, Tina.
Yeah, she said the committee is creating assessment plans, operating guidelines, and much more. She'd be more than happy to talk about it if you would like her to.
Do we have time?
Yes, let's find her
Do
here.
we have time, Kate? That'd be great.
All right.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, well, I don't want to jump in. I mean, Sherry, you're doing a great job talking about everything, but if there are any questions about Neighbors, I'm happy to share any more details, especially since we lost the first half of the narration of that video.
Well, yes, please talk about the concept. Would you from the inception?
Sure.
How did it get started? What have you
Well,
done?
I think one of the most exciting things to highlight about how it got started is that it started with Taylor Nobby, who's now Taylor Holycross, who was an intern at Art Spaces, I think in 2016. And she since graduated and has moved on to Florida. But as she was working at Art Spaces, Mary introduced her to the work of Matthew Mazzotta. And Taylor just really saw the work that he does. He works a lot in developing, redeveloping, revitalizing communities. And this is Storefront Theater in Lyons,
Wonderful.
Nebraska, which is, one of the many cities across the Midwest that, through disinvestment, this one's down in Alabama, called Open House. So he just does a lot of work in communities that are revitalizing or that are developing or, that face challenges and are working to overcome them. And Taylor just saw him as being a good fit for Terre Haute. So, college senior, she just reached out to Matthew Mazzotta and said, hey, let me tell you a little bit about Terre Haute. And she was particularly interested in working in the Rives neighborhood. And so Matthew said, hey, yeah, this sounds amazing. Even though the way Matthew typically works is he works with organizations who already have all the funding in place to build a sculpture, from, going through the research like he does. He always does those outdoor living rooms. So going through the research process all the way through fabrication and installation. And we didn't have any of that. We had no money at that point. But Matthew said, yeah, I'd be interested in working in Terre Haute. Fast forward a little bit, Taylor graduates, moves to Florida, but Mary maintained that connection with Matthew. And Meredith Lynn, who had been the director of the art gallery at ISU at that time, said, hey, we can write an NEA grant, we can bring Matthew here. So we all worked together, got this NEA grant, and then fast forward a little bit more, Meredith also moves to Florida. And so Mary and I and several other people worked through the project because we got the NEA grant to bring Matthew to Terre Haute. And so we said, okay, well, let's do this. So we brought Matthew, he did his outdoor living room, did his extensive research, and created the concepts for Neighbors. And he came in 2018, created the concepts in 2019. And now, fast forward another year, and here we are with a really robust Neighbors committee from Art Spaces. We have, I think, about 25 people on the overarching committee, and then there are multiple subcommittees. We've created a mission, vision, and core values to guide the project, an assessment plan that we're hoping will become, well, honestly, we want it to become an international model for how do we assess the social, physical, economic impact of public art projects. And then the programming committee, which Sherry, you already mentioned, that's creating some ideas for how we might program this space, because it's a space that people can use just while they're at the park. I mean, while it's closed up, it provides seating, it provides shade, provides something interesting to look at in the park. There'll be pathways, be fully accessible pathways throughout the park. So all of those things will happen. But then when it's activated, when it's transformed, we want programming that's in line with what residents of the neighborhood said they wanted to do there, what they wanted to see there, what they want to have happen in their neighborhood. And the ultimate goal is that Neighbors will be, it'll be run by a manager who will be a half-time position contracted through the Parks and Recreation Department. And that person will implement programming in line with the mission, vision, and core values that were all derived from what people in the neighborhood said they wanted to see there and do there, based on their hopes and their dreams and their desires.
Thank you so much, Tina. That really was a beautiful explanation of how all of this came to be. And I think one of the things that we often don't appreciate when we see a lovely sculpture erected in place, we're enjoying it, we don't appreciate all of the thought, all of the time, all of the energy, all of the effort, everything that has gone into making that happen. When did you all start this? What year, Tina? Do you remember? 2016, did you say?
So Taylor reached out to Matthew in 2016.
Okay.
We wrote the NEA grant that allowed us to bring Matthew in 2017, and then were awarded the money in 2018. So he did his kind of initial research in the fall of 2018, created his concepts and brought those back to us in 2019, early 2019. And then for the past year and a half, we've been working on fundraising and building the consortium that's really, there's an advisory council that will kind of inform, help the manager, whoever that person may be, so that it's not all falling on one person, but remains a community effort. And there's representation of people who live in the neighborhood at every stage of the game. So yeah, so it's been, 4 years now since the initial efforts got started. And I think that's something else that's important to highlight. These things, maybe people who see, oh, the piece is being installed now, and it took a month from the time they poured the foundation till it was actually installed, and there was a grand opening event. But it takes a lot longer than that, especially for a project of this magnitude.
Kate, I think as you probably have noticed, those of us who love art spaces, and that's many of us, could probably talk about this forever. I know that you probably have to let us go, but I think Tina could probably talk about Neighbors Forever, and I would love to hear her do that. It's exciting for our community, and we're grateful to Jim Eifert for getting things started. But fundamentally, bottom line, we're grateful to Mary Kramer, whose indefatigable energy, and above all, I think, creativity, her thoughtfulness radiates in so many directions. And next time, I look forward to listening to Mary Kramer talk about Art Space's public art collection. But in the meantime, thank you very much, Kate, for the opportunity.
Well,
It's been fun.
thank you, all of you. I mean, it clearly takes a passion to be able to continue and stay dedicated for that 4+ years, for one project. And, and there's probably some time yet to go. I don't know when you project being able to complete and start construction on Neighbors, but
Well, we're still working on fundraising, so if
Yep.
anybody has some spare cash lying around, we could use some more contributions. So,
and I think share this video, because when you do hear all of the audio and it's very heartwarming, share this video as much as you can. That's what people need to see to loosen up their pocketbooks a little bit. So, thank you all so very much for joining and contributing and chatting. We'll be back again with Art Spaces. Like I said, that Tuesday, I think it's August the 11th would be that after the 4th. So we'll try to get it rescheduled then, and we'll talk more about other things, the Return to the River project, and all the other things going on too. So thank you, and have a beautiful rest of your Tuesday.
Thank you, Kate.
bye-bye.
Thank you,
Thank
Sherry.
you.
Thank you, Tina.
Miss you, Tina.
Mhm.